Trump is getting away with a lot. He's essentially trolling the whole town. He's having his Hitler Youth here, known as Turning Point USA, and they're all walking around calling people faggots and commies and threatening to put us in the camps and everything. And one guy, they're even dressed like little Nazis. And here they come now, and they just had nothing else to do but to get away with this in the middle of a black city, and that's a bad sign. I see, right, there you go. It's a bad sign, not just for, not only for Biden and his election, which is not my concern, but it is worrisome that we don't have enough of a presence against these guys that we should be able to chase them down the street. See, this guy here, it looks like he just came out of Starship Troopers, which is a movie about fascism. So this is what we have going here. This is not the end of it, of course. People will at some point realize that if you don't fight, it's going to be bad news for your democracy. And I do not believe that the elections will settle this question. This question will be settled in the streets. And that's what's important about this. We've decided we would stay here even if nobody came. We weren't going to give it to them and say they can come in here and get away with this and not have any opposition. I know the bankruptcy was and election of a white mayor and everything was supposed to make downtown safe for white people and all that crap. But it's not. It's going to be what is going to be safe for Trumpers now? Your regular white person won't be able to do it, or they have to be a Trumper. So anyway, that's all this whole union officer has to say. I'm a member of BAM by any means necessary. Have been since its inception in '95 over the question of affirmative action in California, and the leading body of our union at the water department, where I worked for 30 years, was for the last 15 years they elected, people that were aligned with BAM, and we gave them as much hell as we can. We had a strike that was not successful. It was smashed by the federal courts under a right-wing Sean, whatever his name was, right-wing federal judge. And so there needs to be a reawakening.
Hey, I support all y'all.
And I believe there will be. Thank you, appreciate it. So, but there's going to be more opportunities, and like I said, there will be street fights. I'm not going and loading up on ammo or anything, but you can smell it. You can tell what's going to happen. Whether he loses, whether Trump wins or loses, these guys are not going to give up one way or another, and they're either going to be able to basically destroy the democratic state such as it is, or they will make January 6th look like a cakewalk. And Lord help us if we're not willing to match enthusiasm with enthusiasm and guts with guts. So hopefully we're not going to have a similar conversation a year from now. It won't be, because a year from now things will change. One way or another, they will change. So that's all I got for you.
So, what about the unions in Detroit? Why aren't they here? Or why do you think they should be here?
We're the Democrats.
Right.
You could make an argument that the unions have settled for being the labor caucus of the Democratic Party. And that's sad, but the Democratic Party isn't even here. They come to a Democratic town with their base that black people that they need to vote in the fall, or they lose, and they don't even show up and with a sign saying Trump's a bum. I mean, Jesus Christ. See, these guys the liberals are like they've settled for the role of a doorman to fascism. And I was never one of those guys that said, oh, Reagan was a fascist and Nixon was a fascist. I don't throw that word around like, but we're facing fascism now. I mean, it hasn't captured the nation yet, but when it does through elections, as it always has in Europe. It wins through elections, and then the democratic norms are shattered after the fascists or the fascist figurehead.
Never mind what happens if it's not done through an election this fall.
Right. Like I said, the election will not determine probably even who's in office. That'll be determined in the streets. And that's a cold thing to say. I'm 76. I can't do that much in the street anymore. But somebody better. And the unions aren't here. Where the fuck are they? You know. And now already, as loyal as a supporter of Biden as in the end Sean Fain was, even now the government's going after him. It looks like they're going to try to jam him up with some corruption shit. If they get him some kind of corruption shit, that won't be the real reason. The real reason was because he even inadvertently inspired a pro-union consciousness in the country, and they don't like him for it.
So you believe the actions of the Monitor?
I don't trust him. I didn't trust him when the Monitor was over the Teamsters in the 70s and 80s. No, I don't believe that in the government going in and being the agent that cleans up unions. The members have got to do that. If they don't do it, all right, I understand, but it hasn't made, okay, has the Teamsters been a better union, really, since they've had direct elections? No, it's just another kind of namsy-pamsy union and be laughed out of the Hoffa is rolling in his grave, the kind of shit that they put up. And Walter Reuther, they weren't all that to begin with, but still. All I can point to is what was.
So you said you don't lightly use the term fascism or fascist.
No. It's the movement. He's got a movement. It's different than Reagan. Reagan wasn't a movement. Nixon wasn't even a movement. I know he had support and he had the hard hats and all that, but he didn't have a mobilized petty bourgeois, movement that is always behind, an active movement that's always behind fascism. It's the fuel for fascism. It's that dissatisfaction.
It's the what?
It's the fuel.
Got it.
So this is serious shit here, Frank.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And if Biden wins the election in November,
they're just going to continue cave to the right. It's like he's caving to the right. All this stuff about the border. He just said, well, fuck international law and the refugees, and I didn't really mean that when I criticized Trump. Actually, I'm going to take Trump's plan and I'm going to push that, and then hopefully the Trumpsters, some of them will vote for me. Okay, that doesn't work that way. If you got a choice between light beer and real beer, most people are going to choose real beer. So they know that Trump is the real deal, and that Biden is not as trustworthy a reactionary as it's about all you can say. Not as trustworthy a reactionary as Trump is. So he's not going to win many votes out of that. Those people don't want to vote for Joe.
it's called appeasement, isn't it?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
where's that taken us in history?
Right.
Not to get too far into the weeds, but the study of what happened with the communists and the Social Democratic Party, which was huge, millions of workers in Germany in the late 20s and 30s, and they couldn't even unite to go out and stop the fascists when they were little. Even Hitler said he could have been stopped when they were little, and they couldn't do it. They argued with each other. Okay, they can have differences, but you work that out in the course of struggle. They didn't do that, and we can't even get that here. There's a small radical group like that, and an old guy like you and me. The left in this country, kind of and all over the world, especially with the fall of Stalinism, they just had sort of lost their bearings. And without a left, it's hard. Spontaneously, people are not going to be able to defend their working conditions and livelihood and democracy and rights.
So what do you think will be the impact of a Trump in the White House and the labor movement?
Oh, wow, it'll be hell on wheels. Oh, he'll make Reagan look like Sean Finn. Yeah, because he's anti-union, and even if he wasn't anti-union, he's going to please those parts of him who get him in office. And he just met with all these CEOs, and they said he was crazy and talked crazy shit. But they're still going to put more and more money into his coffers because they think they can get 1, tax cuts, 2, any regulations taken off that protects us from being poisoned, etc., and 3, crushing the unions that they have to deal with. And so, yeah, Trump's going to do that. And this time, it ain't going to be dicking around. This time, he's got volumes of regulations set up to change things with that Project 2025.
Yeah. So what do you want? What do you want to say to the activists that'll see this interview? What do you want to tell them?
You have no choice but to fight. We have no choice but to fight, even when the fight is hard and lonely. Because in the end, you have the program for change and for overturning the established order, and then the rest is mass psychology, and people just need to get serious and get in the streets.
I'm Nicole with BAM, and I just want to, we had a great rally today. We had great discipline, and we felt the power of the people of Detroit with us as we were here protesting against Trump. And we just want to invite everyone to come join us the next time, because I know a lot of people see stuff happening and think about coming and maybe feel nervous. We haven't done anything before. It feels like, oh, it won't matter. It absolutely matters. What matters the most is that you're going to feel so much better and stronger and powerful if you come. And that's how we're going to stop Trump.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and we've been following the rise of fascism in the United States and internationally with Javier Milei in Argentina and many other countries, and also the growth of a fascist movement in the United States and the threat to working people, to Black, Brown, Asian people in the United States, as well as immigrants. And joining us today is Frank Hammer. He's the past president of UAW 909 in Detroit and has been active in the labor movement for many, many decades. In the working classes, also is a member of UAWD, United Auto Workers for Democracy. Welcome to our show, Frank.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
And happy Father's Day. So yesterday was the visit of Donald Trump to Detroit. There were a number of events, including to Black people in Detroit, and also the Turning Point organization, which is a fascist type organization. Why don't you talk about what happened yesterday at the events that you attended, and also your work around this issue?
So Trump made two stops within the city of Detroit, not the suburbs. And I did not attend either one of them, but I can tell you that seeing the news reports, that he did attend. He went to something called a roundtable discussion at a Black church on the west side of Detroit called Church 180. and there was a considerable audience there, mixed but largely black. And then after he was there, he went to the Central Convention Center in downtown Detroit, used to be known as Cobo Hall, now it's Huntington Place, and met or made an appearance, presentation, a speech at the organization Turning Point.
Turning Point. That's correct.
This reactionary organization that's mobilizing Trump, the MAGA movement and Trump supporters. And I went down because I went to downtown where the convention was being held because I thought it was very important for the masses of people in Detroit and the region to give Trump the message that he's not welcome in Detroit. The convention center, contrary to years ago, is now privatized. So, they can bring in the Huntington Place can bring in whoever they want without any, comment by the city. But my take on the city was that it was largely silent on Trump's appearance here in Detroit. So I did run into a group of demonstrators. They numbered less than 10 who were there to say, Donald Trump, you are not welcome in Detroit. So it raises a lot of questions in my mind about the political preparedness for, the movement that regardless of what transpires in November, should Trump win or should he lose, so-called lose, because that will not be part of the vocabulary. It will be immediately represented as stolen. I don't know. People don't know what is going to happen in the fall, but all I do know is that he stated that if he loses the election, expect a bloodbath. I don't know how people are interpreting that. And the showing of the unions, the grassroots organizations, or I should say the absence thereof of people in Trump's visit here in Detroit is really something that I think ought to deserve wide discussion and examination as to why that was the case.
And of course, the insurrection, having the Confederate flag in the House with his supporters, his statement that he's going to commute the people who did that insurrection, the Supreme Court, which is dominated by, I would say, insurrectionists. They don't even want to say whether he's immune from prosecution. It seems like there's a growing tide within particularly the billionaires, technocrats, Elon Musk and others, to support a different form of rule in this country, a dictatorial rule. And it seems at the same time that the unions are basically saying the way to stop the rise of fascism is to get Biden in. What do you think about that whole strategy that if you vote for Biden, if he becomes president, that's going to solve the problem? And that's a way of dealing with this growing, I would say, fascist movement in the United States.
I did talk to, amongst the group that were there to stage a protest, I did talk to a retired trade unionist from the Detroit Federation of Teachers. And I thought the conversation was important. And he did bring up, and it's my feeling that we're really witnessing an appeasement of the reactionaries under the Biden administration, and most recently that's evident with regard to Biden announcing an executive decision that would be, the effects of which, or the intended effects, would be to stop immigration at the southern border. Very much in line with what Trump did while he was president and what was ruled illegal. So we're facing appeasement, not only on that front but on others as well. And so, regardless of what happens in November, if Biden were to be elected, we're still contending with a fascist movement that has grown in the U.S. That is the MAGA movement. When we encountered some of the MAGA supporters, while we were out demonstrating right nearby, near the convention center, the retort was, "America first, America first." This is a nationalist, Christian nationalist slogan, and it says reams about, what is the status of workers and working people, because we're all going to have to be subservient to the national interest. And that is really the root of fascism, that we have to be subservient to the corporate state. And I believe that it's absolutely critical to keep Trump out of the White House. And unfortunately, it's going to take a Biden realistically to prevent that from happening, to have not give access to Trump to the White House. But the labor movement, the trade unions, the grassroots organizations, the community organizations have to be very clear that the day following, we're going to be dealing with a fascist movement, one way or the other. And so Biden, as far as I'm concerned, as terrible as his record has been on so many fronts, and especially on Gaza, that a lot of people are dissuaded from voting for him for that very reason. But I think that that's really amounts to me to leaping from the frying pan into the fire, and I think we ought not do that.
Well, in the 30s, when you had another rise of fascism in the United States, you had fascist rallies who were organizing supporters of the Nazis in the United States. There were demonstrations, leftists called them. There were demonstrations of thousands of people against the rise of fascism in the United States in that period. And there was an attempted coup in 1934 where a number of capitalists went to Smedley Butler, retired Marine, and tried to entice him to lead a march of veterans in Washington and seize power. But there obviously, the insurrection, there was an attempted insurrection, an attempted coup to stop the certification of the election. And the UAW, for example, your president, Sean Fain, has said that he's a scab, that he represents corporate America. What has the UAW done to educate people about fascism, not just the fact that he is a scab and represents the union busters? When he was in office, he appointed corporate union busters to the board of the NLRB, other organizations. But what has the union done, and what should they do to educate the members of the UAW, a portion of who probably will vote for Trump?
That's very clear, that there is a constituency within UAW that's pro-Trump. So I think that the UAW has certainly not addressed this subject in the manner that it needs to be. I mean, I think I was very glad that Sean Fain, I think a minority of union leadership in the U.S. who have called Trump out. I don't know that there are other union leaders, and certainly nobody in the AFL, that has called Trump out. And on the one hand, so I think that was very good. But on the other hand, it's all well and good to make that proclamation, but it also has to be driven at the level of the rank and file. And there are a lot of rank and file members that I think that are, wanting to mobilize and say, we don't want Trump. We don't want Trump. But I don't think that the framework, we need to have that framework to understand, what does Trump represent? What does it mean to establish a white Christian national, paradigm in the U.S., which is really conceding a victory to the South, in the wake of the Civil War, that the South has been constantly fighting to overturn their defeat during the Civil War. And this is kind of like what's coming down the pike with a Trump election, because, you know, you can be sure that the majority of the MAGA movement is in the South, and also, you know, through the central band of the U.S. all the way up to Idaho. And we need, there needs to be a discussion in the rank and file. And I've been promoting that within the UAWD, that there be a clear discussion about what are the roots of fascism. What does it actually mean? What does it look like in practice, especially in regards to the labor movement? And, you know, if we think that somehow the labor movement is going to be safe under, you know, a rule by Trump and under the MAGA movement, we need to re-examine, because that's a mistaken belief that trade unions are going to come under increasing, you know, pressure in a fascist direction. We have to look at that, and we have to look at our own history in the U.S. And I think it was really important that you were pointing it out, that if there's going to be a fascist coup attempted, this will not be the first time. And certainly 2020 was, you know, a dress rehearsal for what might be attempted this time around in 2024.
Well, considering that the UAW has said that it wants to organize the South, for example, we know that the fascist forces in the South are organized, are armed, and have been murdering people. You have the governor of Texas who just commuted the sentence of a racist who murdered a white who was at a Black Lives Matter. It was there will be probably an escalation of fascist violence, physical attacks on blacks and on workers who are organizing, black and white who are organizing in the South. Do you think that that's a real threat in organizing within the UAW if there's a Trump government?
The UAW, to its credit, recently scored a resounding success at the VW plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It lost a follow-up at Mercedes in Alabama. And I'm under the premise that the corporate class is not going to be very happy to see a renewed, organized South with union drives succeeding and winning over workers, and, you know, building the strength of the working class in the South. And I think that we could see with what they did in Mercedes that they will mount offensives against the UAW. I mean, it's going to happen regardless of whether Biden or Trump is in, but there's certainly going to be an acceleration and an encouragement under a Trump regime to prevent the UAW, for example, in organizing in the South. And we recognize that today the UAW only represents half of the auto workers in the U.S. We're not in a position of great strength. So I think a Trump regime would, you know, nullify these incredible advances that have been made under Sean Fain in organizing and in these breakthrough contracts, as he's, you know, fond of calling them. So I think that if we take that seriously, again, there has people, the U.S. working class, and not only among the white workers, black workers as well, and, you know, Chicanos and Latinos and Arabic workers as well, you know, that we all need to understand that as odious as Biden is on so many things, that I see a qualitative change coming under the Trump reoccupation of the White House. And I think that we have to do everything to fight it, to prevent it from happening, and be prepared the next day to fight against, to form a united front against fascism, regardless of who's elected to office.
And has that discussion at all been in the UAW? Because as we're discussing now, if Trump gets elected, he's going to organize to shut down any organizing in the South, for that matter, or anywhere nationally. Starbucks, all these other movements. Is there a discussion, any kind of education about what it would mean to have a Trump government for working people in this country.
So there's been there hasn't. It's negligible, I should say. So I think it was good that as we mentioned earlier, that Sean Fain called out Trump as a scam, and what's also to Fain's credit is that he pointed to an interview that Trump did back, I think it was in 2015, where he made his strategy very, very clear. And I don't know that it's been clear in broad swaths of the working class. And it was very simple. Trump advocated that as a way to attack unionized plants, that the companies leave the Midwest and the unionized sectors, not go to Mexico, not go to China, just go to non-union sectors, like, for example, in the South. And his strategy was, you watch, within 2-3 years, those workers, those union workers, will be begging for their jobs at a third of the wage. And that was what he laid out in 2015. And it seems to me that workers understand what that means as a strategy. And it's got to be pinned on Trump so that we understand that Trump is going to be serving millionaires and billionaires. He's not going to be serving the white working class, and he's certainly not going to be serving black workers and black folks in Detroit.
And you were recently at a conference. It was a conference of 3,500 Palestinians, supporters of the Palestine. You were on a panel there, and it seemed, from what I heard, there were some labor panels, but there was no mention of the threat of fascism and the fact that Trump has said if he was in charge, he would round up these pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and if they were immigrants, if they were from Palestine or outside this country, he'd expel them immediately from the United States, just throw them out of the country. Was that at all discussed at this conference, or the threat of fascism and what it means for the Palestinian movement and those people who are supporting Palestinians?
Yeah, I think we have to be really clear. I mean, he said he would deport and or crush the demonstrations. If anybody thinks that the Genocide Joe is going to be replaced by somebody that's not a Genocide Trump, they're sadly mistaken. So that's not an alternative. The left and the trade union movement have to know that they're going to be the first targets. I don't know that I've heard a speech from Trump that hasn't referred to communists and fascists and Marxists. And, obviously the Democrats are not going to respond to that, but I don't see any response to that. And the more it is said, the more it's going to become part of the common vocabulary, if it isn't already. And I think that the trade union movement and the folks who can consider themselves leftists and are part of left organizations need to see that as a direct challenge and a direct threat to progressive movements, grassroots movements, come after November.
Well, wasn't that also a tact of Hitler and the fascists in Germany to accuse their opponents of being communists? They accuse the Social Democrats of being communists. They accuse liberals of being communists. I mean, it's the same thing that the right wing here in this country and Trump supporters say they're all communists. They're socialists and communists. That tactic. But you talked about the left. It seems like the left organizations, and they're not a large percentage of the population, very small, but they seem disconnected and really American exceptionalism. They don't think it's going to happen here. Do you get that feeling that people really don't think that a fascist regime could come to the United States?
So let me respond to that by saying that I think what's really important, I have my own little sort of take on what I think is happening in the U.S. And I think it's a move toward fascism that's on a slightly slower motion than it was in Germany, but it's still that direction. So that in Germany, when Hitler rose to power, his first targets were what was a very strong left-led workers' movement, and leading that movement were communists in Germany who were inspired by the Russian Revolution. And the first targets were certainly not the Jews. They were the left. They were the communists. They were the socialists. And then it was the trade union leaderships and the working masses in Germany. So what we need to understand is in this country, we saw some of that in the McCarthy period, where during the McCarthy period, people were attacked for some of them being the greatest working class leaders the U.S. has ever seen, who were quote unquote communists. And they were targeted. And by and large, the communist and social movements have never really recovered from the McCarthy period. So the unions now in the U.S. are much more vulnerable because they don't have a left front, leadership. And I think they're more subject to the second level of attack that occurred like it occurred in Germany on a much shorter timeline. So that's what we need to understand, that it's more in slow motion. And that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening, but we need to identify what the actual pace of this has been. And I think we're seeing an acceleration and a steeper incline as we approach the November election and what will probably follow.
And you talked earlier about a united front against fascism. How do you see a united front against fascism? Because, for example, there's an escalation of hanging nooses at factories. There's terrorism against workers. There are these racist attacks, machine gunning of people in the Black community, Asian community, LGBT attacks. How would a united front be organized, and where is that going to come from? Because it seems like not only is there no united front against fascism, most of the left in this country don't even think it's a serious danger.
Yeah, and you just reminded me that you were asking the question about this exceptional conference that was held in the same place, Huntington Place, at the end of May in regards to the Palestinian struggle. It was a People's Conference for Palestine. And it was high energy. There were, like you said, 3,500 activists, mostly young. And there was a real, many Arabic peoples, many Palestinians. And there was a very aggressive stand among the participants against U.S. hegemony and U.S. support for the genocide that's going on in Gaza. And in support of liberation struggles around the world. I mean, for example, the liberation struggle in the Philippines was highlighted, as were struggles in Africa. So all of that was the case. The pronounced political line of the conference was to go after Genocide Joe, and therefore there was no discussion. Well, what does Trump represent for the Palestinians? And we know that Trump, during his administration, was happy to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, which had been a no-no for decades. And he did it with a stroke of the pen. It happened. And this was a real coddling of the Israeli Zionists. And, of course, Biden in the follow-up never reversed that decision. And, this is what we can expect going forward. And the line, unfortunately, at the conference was to not examine what would be the alternative. In other words, they treated the election as only a referendum on Biden. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not a referendum. It's not just, yeah, we support what he did, or no, we don't support what he did. Excuse me, it's an election. And if you vote him down, or if you stay home, you're going to ensure that Trump gets back in the White House. And I think that people are not paying strict attention to what that would represent. So I think that was a weakness of the conference, and I think it's really important for us to try to highlight and correct that in time for November.
And within the unions, you've introduced a resolution for UAWD to begin a discussion of the danger of fascism, so there can be a debate and discussion on it. But within the labor movement, it seems that not only is there no discussion, but for example, the Vermont AFL-CIO called for a general strike against any attempted coup and insurrection. The former president, Richard Trumka, threatened to decertify them. And right now, as a matter of fact, Liz Schuler is trying to prevent the United Labor slate getting elected in Vermont. They want to take over really the Vermont AFL-CIO because it's been critical of the AFL-CIO's silence about the rise of fascism, one of the reasons, and the threat of a coup in the United States, and they're going after them. It seems that in reality, the labor bureaucracy, the union bureaucracy, are basically preventing and obstructing any real debate and discussion about the danger of fascism politically. They don't want that debate in the working class, even though the workers and the unions will be a main target if there's a growth and control of fascists of this country.
Yeah, and that's, very puzzling because you would think, and one of the questions that was posed to me yesterday when I was at this small rally and, defying the Trump appearance in Detroit was, where are the Democrats? You would think that people who want to vote Democrat and who want to get Biden into the White House, who are believers, you would think that they would be out to challenge this horrible man who has tried to, slander Detroit in the 2020 election by saying, that Detroit represented a corrupt election and the votes and none of it was true. And it was a great insult, it seems to me, to Detroit and to the Detroit establishment and the Detroit regime here. And nobody said a word. Nobody's concerned. Nobody's concerned about what does this man mean by he's going to be a bloodbath if he loses. Do we take that seriously? And if so, how do we have him in the city without any protests whatsoever, as if, well, we didn't hear anything. And the labor movement, it's kind of like they think if we're good with the status quo, that somehow the status quo will be good to us, and it just doesn't work that way. And what we see in the change in the status quo is, it's kind of like, well, a lot of us don't believe in the kind of democracy that capitalism offers us, right? 100 million people, don't vote with their feet. This is how the masses of people respond to what capitalists offer as democracy. But you know what? What the capitalists offer as democracy is the very thing that the MAGA movement and Trump is trying to bring down. So it's kind of, you're caught in this sort of situation where, well, you mean I got to fight for what this capitalist democracy represents because it's better than what's coming down the pike? That's what people have to consider. Not lovely choices, but we don't get to choose what our choices are. They're thrust on us. And I think that the labor movement is tied in with the status quo and don't feel the threat that Trump would represent. I mean, they would understand changes in national labor relations decisions, but it's no point recognizing that, half a year from now, the point is to recognize it at this moment.
And of course, the United States just passed, Democrats and Republicans, a budget for the military, $880 million, nearly $1 trillion. Trillions are going for war. The infrastructure is falling apart. Workers and residents of East Palestine can't even get health care. They can't move out of a community that's been contaminated by Norfolk Southern, the vinyl chloride that they ignited healthcare in this country. Yet it seems that the unions, including the UAW, there's no challenge by the unions against militarization, against the war drive now, continued money to Ukraine, continued money to Israel, and for militarization of Asia with the war with China. It seems like these are issues that are leading to a potential world war. And that is not on the table in the unions. I mean, it's really no national union has said enough of the military budget. What are we spending trillions on this war machine? And people in this country don't even have health care. You have homeless in the Bay Area and Detroit, all over this country, homeless people. People can't get health care. Education is being attacked. And yet, not a voice, not one national union has said no to trillions of dollars to the war machine.
So I want to say in this instance, and just talking about the UAW, that there have been important developments within the UAW over the last couple of years, as you well know. There's a lot of people who watch your video program will know, and that is that we democratically elected the new leadership. That was the first time in the history of the UAW, and it was unprecedented. And there have been certain strides that have been gone ahead in regards to having a more political framework for our understanding, and that where that's been really pronounced has been in the support that UAW has shown for Palestinians, both in calling for a ceasefire and calling out the repression of demonstrators who happen to be UAW. We know that the UAW has been involved now in a political strike in the University of California university system, where the UAW represents 48,000 academic workers in local 4811. And this is a very important moment where you have a good sizable section of our union fighting back against the repression, and specifically the underhanded means by which the University of California regents now are undermining labor law in California by going to a reactionary court and getting a suspension of the strike. So I think, to your point, these are the kinds of things. I mean, this is involving UAW members. We need to explain and expose nationwide is how this is an instance of the erosion of labor rights, especially on the question of Palestine and the question of Zionist Israel. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. And how labor gets a clear position on where we are in the regard to that conflict is essential for going forward, because otherwise, with the tactics that they're using against progressive UAW members and supporters is that, this is anti-Semitism. Anytime you speak out and criticize Israel, it's anti-Semitism. And this is very dangerous. And I think the labor movement has to step up to the plate and say, no, it's not anti-Semitism. It's a legitimate protest. And it's in support of, for example, Palestinian workers. And that's who we are.
And of course, the AFL-CIO and the UAW as part of the AFL-CIO continues to support the Histadrut, which is a racist trade union federation, which is supporting the IDF, which is part of was part of the support of the apartheid regime in South Africa. They helped armed it and did all kinds of economic and political things to support the apartheid regime in South Africa. Yet in this strike that's going on now, 48,000, that's been called off by the union because of this injunction. They went outside the PERB and got a right-wing court judge to issue a contempt. Sean Fain has not even visited California to support the strike. I doubt that the UAW has got it educating members nationally. It's not on their website about the attack on democratic rights. It seems there's complete silence by the UAW leadership about this attack on democratic rights. How are they going to defend the rest of the workers if they can't even get behind their own members in California that face repression? They face felonies. Union members and students face felony charges in Los Angeles, and there's an attack as well in San Diego of UAW members. It seems that one of the reasons is that we mean fighting Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, and Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California. And it raised the question, there is no political alternative. Mass working class political alternative. There's no Labor Party. And fighting to defend democratic rights, the right to strike, would come directly in conflict with the Democratic Party, which controls the Board of Regents at the University of California, really run this public educational institution.
So yes, on this front, the fact that the entire ruling capitalist establishment in the U.S. is pro-Zionist is what puts us in these circumstances, and we have to recognize that that this is extremely dangerous for our movement, because if Nikki Haley, if she would have her way, it would be, I think we would be looking at a Zionist United States. And you only need to see what Zionism has delivered for the Palestinian people and for workers in Israel and in Gaza. This is a threat, and you're right. It's on some things, the ruling classes in the U.S. Cohere, and they certainly cohere on who is a better friend to Netanyahu. This is what we're confronted with. I just want to add one other thing. I mean, I think that what's usually not stressed enough is the rising threat that we face with climate and with the climate change. And, for example, this coming week, we're going to be in excess of 100 degrees, feel like temperature in Detroit, never mind what's going on in Arizona, never mind the flooding that's going on in Miami. And we're talking about somebody occupying the White House that's a climate denier. What does that portend for us in the struggle to make dramatic changes that we need to make to ameliorate the worst impacts that we're going to face with the climate crisis? And of course, the alternative is we're faced with a Biden who's greenwashes the struggle around the climate crisis. So those are our two choices. And again, with a fascist MAGA movement standing behind climate denial, we're in for some very, very serious problems. And I think that all that we can do to struggle to push that back and to advance our movements post November is the most critical thing that we can do, and that's the stand that I'm taking.
And of course, war is a major contributor to climate. These wars actually increase the warming of the earth. And it's interesting because one of the reasons, I mean, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people could die in the United States these coming next few months from the climate. They're not prepared. People, if you're poor, you can't even afford air conditioning. You may have power outages. Florida, DeSantis even banned the language of climate change, and they face massive flooding. It could be a large number of people could die. And as we recall, with Trump, he denied COVID. And as a matter of fact, in my view, that's one of the reasons he lost the election. He was set to win the election, the last election he was in, but the COVID pandemic actually shook up and killed a lot of even his own supporters who were told, don't worry about it, don't wear a mask, you don't have to worry about public health. It's all made up. That's what Donald Trump was saying to people. You don't have to worry about COVID. And they were getting sick at the White House. They were going without masks, having parties there, and then all of them were coming down COVID. It was panic time. It may be that we may see a similar kind of disaster, climate catastrophe this coming year. The climate is not stopping. The warmth of the earth and the temperature of the water, 90 degrees, it's like the oceans are burning up and creating hurricanes. There was a hurricane in Houston, which they've never had before. So this climate crisis is drawing us and the world closer to global catastrophe. Yet it seems the radical changes as far as the energy industry, for example, in this country, they want to drill more wells. They want to have more nuclear plants where they don't have any space for the waste now. There are over 100 nuclear plants that are old. They're deteriorating. There's no place to put the radioactive waste in these plants. It seems that we are coming into a very dangerous situation where all these dangerous developments coming together in a really catastrophic situation. Are you concerned about that, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, so typically, the reply would be, "Oh, you're just fear mongering, right?" And I take that seriously. I mean, I think that's you have to question yourself. Is this just fear mongering? And let me put it to you this way: my parents had to flee Nazi Germany and they fled in 1933 because they saw something that was coming that a lot of other people weren't paying attention to. And they fled Nazi Germany and they went to France. And 5 years later, they figured out, oh, we got to leave France. And my family, my mother and father, and my just born brother ended up in Ecuador, which is where I was born. And so my birth comes from refugees, people leaving Nazi, what became the Nazi Holocaust. And so my inclination is to kind of like try to be in my father's footsteps and my mother's footsteps and understand what's coming down the pike and preparing for it aggressively and preparing it with intuition and with intelligence. And that's my framework in regards to what I see coming down the pike with what I see in the MAGA movement, in the racism of the MAGA movement. We haven't even talked about what has happened to the rights of women, which is another target of the fascist movement, certainly in Europe in the 30s, the rights of women. And we're seeing the rights of women being attacked today. And we see so many states now which forbid women's access to abortion rights. What's going to happen under a Trump regime? What is our regard for women's rights? And, you can say, well, the Democrats didn't do a very good job of protecting the rights that were won through struggle and through the Supreme Court decision. And that's all well and true. But we got somebody that wants to be in the White House that wants to nullify the rights of women across the board, across the entire U.S., where women will not have a right to go to another state to get a much needed medical abortion. So, on all these fronts, I think we need to be open eyes, and we need to be aware of what the threats what it poses for us, and act accordingly. And that means, like, if Trump shows up in your town, you ought to be out there, and you ought to have your bullhorns, and you ought to have your troops, and you ought to have your signs and say you're not welcome here. And that's going to be going on all across the country. And the fact that it didn't happen in a majority black city like Detroit is really something that it ought to cause pause.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Frank Hammer, retired UAW 909 president, a member UAWD, a longtime activist and internationalist with auto workers around the world, and also concerned about the rise of fascism, the Trump visit to Detroit, and what working people in this country need to do to prepare for the danger of fascism. So thanks for joining us on our show, Frank.
Thank you very much, Steve. Very important.